And it's my distinct pleasure this morning to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Mitzi Montoya. Mitzi Montoya is, I have to read all of these lovely things, the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost at the University of Utah. She's a leader in her field, having served in Dean and Provost positions at several universities in the United States, including the University of New Mexico, Oregon State, and Arizona State University. Dr. Montoya's experience in leading large academic enterprises has given her an eye toward problem solving and engagement. Throughout her career, she has supported student and faculty success, enhanced entrepreneurial ecosystems, and led collaborative initiatives to find solutions for social, technical, and political challenges. As provost, Dr. Montoya seeks to inspire students, faculty, and staff, lead innovation efforts towards operational excellence, and help the U become a top 10 public university with unsurpassed societal impact. So welcome, Dr. Montoya.
Thank you. Okay, if I'm not standing in the right place, I assume someone will let me know. This is good enough? That's good. This is good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. This is fantastic. I don't get to come up to this part of campus very often, other than the fact that I walk up here regularly. But as I was selecting my outfit for the apparently start of fall, I was able to choose from among the many raincoats that I have from the Pacific Northwest days when I was in Oregon and Washington. And it looks like we have a hurricane going on out there. So hopefully it's finished by the time I have to go. I was asked to talk about a few different things today, not the least of which is how do we continue to recruit into our various educational programs. But I also wanted to give just a little bit of background and context for where we are at the university, what I'm working on, major projects I'm working on, because I think they're connected to health education. As was shared in my background, I've come through a wide variety of universities. I spent the better part of my career for the first 15 years at North Carolina State University and have been circling around the Mountain West for a while now. Decided that's where I'm going to land and stay. So I've enjoyed being here. My task with my counterpart currently, Dr. Good, and as you may know, I'm co-chairing the search for the new SVP for Health Sciences. Our joint task and what I'm particularly charged with doing is really working to prepare the U for its next era of success. The U has achieved incredible success, which is what attracted me here. And there's great aspiration and potential for more. And a lot of that involves modernizing our systems. And I'll talk a little bit about some of what that means and what in particular I'm focused on, which just as a prelude to that is student success. That is a priority for the Academic Affairs Office, and I'll share some data about why that's a priority for my office. To give you a sense and just a reminder of our goals, and I'll talk a little bit about one on here that we've seen some evolution on as a result of the strategic planning process. When President Randall took office, he was talking about kind of a goal in relation to size of the institution. The strategic planning process has led to a bit of a change, which is less about there being a target for a particular size and much more of a focus on student outcomes and advancing the reputation of the institution, which as a byproduct of that, we are going to see growth. As a byproduct of serving the state and what the state expects us to do to contribute to workforce development, we're going to continue to see growth. So a key goal that is an area where we have probably the most significant work to do is this 80% graduation rate. And that's focused on undergraduate education. It's not that we're not focused on graduate education. We're doing actually quite well. We have work to do to continue to support our graduate students, but we have the most opportunity for improvement in undergraduate outcomes. Research funding, that's an area of ongoing focus and growth as you listen to talks that we continue to hear by the president and the trustees. That number continues to move. Sometimes I'll hear us focusing on 1.5 billion, depending on the day of the week and who's giving the talk. So another area of interest that is not just the University of Utah focus, but is increasingly a national focus, and increasingly we are being pushed to report and eventually mandated to report on the outcomes of our students, also from a placement and starting salary and early years of earning and lifetime earning capabilities. So this focus on outcome is increasingly part of the public pressure around expectations and perceived value of higher education. Clearly, our interest is being of impact both in this state, but also as a national university and aspirationally a global university. So things that are changing and that are creating pressure for response by the university are really, I would say, three key things. One, Utah's changing, both in terms of its growth and its demographics, and also therefore the mix with what that means in terms of what we see coming into the university. If you've not read the report, I think it's called Changing Utah by the Kim C. Gardner Institute. It's really a great report on understanding what's changing about the state and is therefore creating a need for us to rethink the role of higher education in the state and how do we best serve the state. Certainly marketplace dynamics are changing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit because I think it's important to understand where we are at this moment in time, and student outcomes are essential. So to provide a little context, here's some really gives you, I think, a defined point on what's going on in higher ed right now. We are at a moment in time that goes back to the testimony of the presidents in October, but really preceded that. We have seen a decline in confidence in institutions. So if you look at this is 2015 to 23. And the very short story is that everything's in decline. But the thing that should concern you is if you look at higher education, it's got the most significant decline. And this poll has been done repeatedly, actually now monthly, following October 7th. And this is of great concern, and this is partly why we are going to continue to be the focus of this next legislative cycle. The president predicts it will be for the next 4-ish years, and then we believe that federally it's going to continue to be a focus. And so we, higher education, the institution, face a challenge. We face a public confidence challenge, and it's creating a level of focus on us that requires a response. And here's our particular challenge in Utah. So the data is negative, no matter which political party you're looking at, whether people have college degrees or not, but clearly it's worse, negative. If you look at the Republican Party response to this, and clearly we're in a Republican dominated state. So that is what our legislative body is reflected by. And so this explains some of the questions I suspect you may have for me as we open it up for questions. We face a challenge, and part of that is on us to respond to, both in terms of being more transparent about the value we add and also being better storytellers about the amazing work we do and the impact we have. And part of this is a process that we're going to need to weather, and it's education that we need to do of our lawmakers. And this is what the president and Jason Perry and the rest of us spend a lot of time working on. But this explains a little bit some of the climate that we face. So I share this with you because I think it's important context as we begin to think about some of the challenges that we face. So this is the charge of my office. Number one is to really maximize not only just the real value of the education that our students receive, but I would also argue the perceived value of the education that our students receive, both from to put an economic spin on it for a minute, both from a private good, so the value to the individual and the development that we provide that individual, but also a public good perspective, the value that we contribute to society in what we do as educators. Secondly, we clearly need to support our faculty and their success and well-being. And this, in my view, is fundamental to our ability to achieve our research aspirations and to achieve goal number one. So I think one of the things that we are working on this year is really leaning into and learning from what health sciences has been doing in relation to its wellness and resilience efforts, and make sure that we extend that. It should be extended as deep as it can go across all of health sciences, but also to the rest of campus. It's incredibly important. And then third, there is an increasing focus on our stewardship of resources and how we are managing our resources and how we are demonstrating that we are doing so in a highly effective and efficient way. So you will hear and continue to hear about projects related to service excellence, operational excellence, and increasing our ability to manage our resources in an effective way so that we have mission, market, and margin alignment, which is what it takes to run a university. So in academic affairs, my North Star is student success. Everything I do, every decision I make, because the only things that come to my office are difficult conversations and problems and challenges and trade-offs. And I always center on this. And that should seem obvious, but this is sometimes new to people that bring the complicated issues to my office. So this is the trade-off. When I'm making one, I'm always making the trade-off for the greater good of our students. So here's why I'm talking about student success. And here's why, and I share this not to be Debbie Downer because the rest of the presentation will be positive, but this is truth with love. The love is, we know everyone at this university, in my opinion, cares about our students and cares deeply about our students being successful. And we care deeply about and believe in the mission of our institution. And according to the data, we are failing in many ways, and we have work to do. So what this data says, it's an eye chart that these are the AAU universities. University of Utah is listed here, not because we're third from the bottom, but because the sorting here was actually on admit rate and not on graduation rates. If you sorted by graduation rates, which is over here, we'd be at the bottom for four-year graduation rate, 34% four-year graduation rate, average of all undergraduates at this institution. Six-year graduation rate, 64%, which is also the bottom. So I'll let that sit for a minute. It's no one person's fault. This is why I will go back to what I said at the outset. This is why we must modernize. This institution has, we've paused in the development of some of the modern and what are now well-known, well-published, and well-designed and well-utilized by every other university, certainly in this cohort, of best practices and high impact practices for student success. That includes everything from underlying systems for tracking students, practices and processes, for example, coordinated advising, data, how data is flows, captured and returned out to units so that units can make data-informed decisions. And also, frankly, just some standards. So standards, controls, and accountability and compliance to those standards. So the positive story of hope around this message is that this is actually a really solvable problem. Like a much harder problem to solve is how do we double our research? That's a hard problem to solve because that's asking really interesting questions, doing really hard research, finding resources to do that. This is known. And we actually have most of the resources in place. They simply need to be reorganized and pointed in the right direction. So something you hear in my office talking about, probably ad nauseum, this year and next, and until we get the flywheel going, is Navigate U. Navigate U we launched last year, and Navigate U really is a focus on student success. And we are working through a series of projects. These are just the first 5. There are actually about 5 more right behind this on things we have to tackle in order to move this needle. And this is going to be a lot of hard work because it changes a lot of the way faculty work, what they do, preferences, traditions, the way we've always done things, and all the things. It also tackles silos because part of the reason we have the challenge we do is our whether we want to call it a strength or a historical holdover, we are a very siloed organization. And so while each individual entity has been working to do a really good job as best they can, that cross-cutting need for coordination has been stymied by that. And that's hard for a student because a student often works always, every undergraduate student works across the institution because of general education. So every student works across, and many of them change majors many times, which means they all work, most of them work across, about 80% change majors. And so the need to coordinate is tremendous. So we're working on that. Secondly, we do have work to do similarly in doing better coordination from the graduate school out to our academic units. Undergraduate processes can and should be more centrally coordinated. That doesn't mean controlled, it means coordinated processes. Graduate processes are always going to be distributed. And however, we can provide better support out of the graduate school to all of our graduate programs. So these are some of the things that we have in place that we're working on, including increasing our investment in our outreach to minority serving institutions to continue to diversify our pipeline into graduate school, graduate programs. And coordinating with academic units that want to partner on that. And so we're working on that. We're also working on advancing our international recruiting and making sure that we are increasing our outreach internationally. Really working to provide more marketing tools centrally to the extent to which an academic unit wants to take advantage of those and have access to more sophisticated marketing campaigns to support your graduate enrollment processes. Working to accelerate the review and approval of applications. This has been actually a weak point for this institution where we're taking way too long to get back to highly qualified students, and they get other offers and they take them because we're slow. We might be their first choice, but they've already committed by the time we get back to them. And really working to improve orientation for our graduate students. I want to pause here and tell you something that despite what I told you, it is also true that we are highly attractive to students. We don't have our official data out yet, but all indicators of the data tell us that we broke every record again this year in the history of the U. We will have the highest total enrollment in the history of the U. We'll have the largest first-time, full-time freshman class in the history of the U. We will have the largest graduate enrollment. And then here's the real kicker that at some level is mind-boggling to me in light of what we've been through this last year. We will have the most diverse class in the history of the U. Our diversity numbers went up, not down. And we worked hard at that in order to make that happen and to yield out those students in our pipeline at the undergraduate and graduate level. So that is incredible news. And it says that as we have that attractiveness here, we have to get better at all these things. We have to get better at being as effective and excellent as we can in this process. So even if a student doesn't get selected, perhaps, or doesn't get in, we still remain in positive repute with that audience. And that allows us to continue to increase the quality of our class. The better job we do, the more those students are out there telling stories about their great experience here. And ideally, it's a great experience from the first moment of contact with this institution, whether they get in or not. Some other graduate school recruitment initiatives, particularly on international, includes increasing our international relations so that we are increasingly present and creating awareness out in market through working through consulates, working with new partnerships with global engagement and the schools to create other types of exchange opportunities, whether it's for research or study abroad or faculty exchanges, and improving policies and communications for international students who are applying so that they have a better experience as well. We know that as we approach demographic change, I'm not a big fan of talking about it as a demographic cliff. It's actually a trough. If you look at the data, I refer you to the Kim C. Gardner Institute study. It's not that demographics fall off. It's that population curves move in waves, and we're approaching a downturn of the wave. We're in the downturn of a wave, actually, and it will come later to Utah than to, say, the northeast of this country. And that's a function of age, of population, and birth rates. But it is coming to Utah as well. And as that comes, we have to think about how do we manage that as an institution so that we are continuing to pursue, for example, other markets. Other markets can mean other age groups for education. If you think about the percentage of total Americans with a degree, it's actually quite low. So there are other age groups to pursue within our own state and country. And there are, of course, other countries to pursue as well. So these are strategies that we're actively working on now in order to ensure our future. Graduate applications, just to give an example, this just shows difference over years. It's a fiscal year 21 to 23 up through 24. In other words, total application volume is growing. Is the short story of this graph. I could show you the same thing at the undergraduate level, massive growth in application volume. And that's really important. And most importantly, it's massive growth from out of state. And that's really important because it allows you to select your class in a way that you want to design your class, whether that means academic qualifications, whether it means the diversity of the class. So you have to have a large top of funnel in order to be able to do that. So we are seeing the same outcome at the undergraduate and graduate level, which is that as the reputation of the university grows, so grows the application. Faculty recruitment. Again, I want to speak to this specifically because some of the questions I was asked in advance had to do with, can we still seek diverse students in the pipeline? Can we still seek diverse faculty as we work to ensure that the faculty and the professoriate reflects the student body? And the answer is yes. It's a matter of how you creatively do that. So the only thing we cannot do by law on faculty hiring is require diversity statements. But that does not mean that you can't ask candidates to address how they have worked with historically underrepresented communities, for example, or describe their specific responsibilities that might be related to the particular work that you are asking them to do. You can ask them to share their work that they have done. So there are lots of ways to work through this process so that you understand the qualifications of a candidate. And from a student recruitment standpoint, while we cannot provide scholarships or waivers for groups of specific identities, we can have privately funded scholarships that donors create that can support students from specific backgrounds, if that is important to your program and important to your donor and important to your department. So keep in mind that one of the things I encourage people to do with concerns about HB 261 is, number one, read the law. That's actually really important. And then let's work through issues that don't seem clear to you if it doesn't seem clear how you work within the law. I would also say that I think we are likely in for another round of refinement of the law. And interestingly enough, that's because the early indications right now are that lawmakers believe they may have gone too far, or there have been some unintended consequences that they didn't expect as a result of the law. So we have to wait and see. And I also think it's important to, number one, remain calm. And remember, we have not been legislated out of pursuing our mission, which is to educate. And we'll never be legislated out of our own personal commitments to our respective values. And we value education. That's our job. We value research. That's our job. And that is not what the legislation was about. So let's make sure that what we do is not overreact. And as you have questions, please raise them with your chairs, with your deans, with your respective offices of faculty. For you all have a separate office of faculty than we do, but we are highly coordinated and working together to make sure that we can continue to pursue our work and pursue our mission as we do so. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause and open it up to questions. And I'm going to share a mic, or how do you do it? Oh, you're coming. Okay. Yes.
What are the top three?
Sorry.
I thought I'm loud enough.
It's for those online.
Oh,
Thank you.
So what are the top three factors why undergraduate students dropping off the programs?
Top three factors for undergraduate students not completing. So here, number one factor, so let me describe it as, first, I should refer you all to, there is an excellent report. So we had the National Institute of Student Success come in and do an audit of barriers to student success. And I will make sure the organizers have a copy of that and distribute it to anyone interested, because it's really important reading. And the founder of that is Tim Rennick, who basically this institute was born out of Georgia State University. And so it's the top three factors generally are here, uncoordinated academic advising. And so we have many major changers is an issue. And then when you have a student experiences completely different academic advising and advice, depending on which unit they're in, it makes them feel like they are just starting over and over and over. So we have many people that have 130, 140, 150 credits and still don't have a degree. And on it goes up to 180. And I'm not talking about people that have three majors, saying they don't have a major. Secondly, we had a history of, which has now been stopped, is we have students come in exploratory studies. So they're undeclared, they're undecided. That's normal. Students are undecided. What is not typical is that we had not until now put a stop to that. So there's a limit on which you can stay in exploratory. So effective now, you can only stay as an exploratory student for a maximum of 1 year, 2 terms. Then you must choose in order to re-register. So we have just shy of 1,200 students who are now being rapidly advised. They are being called into sessions. We're doing effectively a major fair, showing them all the majors. They have opportunity to sit with people from the different colleges. They're meeting with advisors, and we're getting them advised. And the goal is that all 1,100, some of them, will be into a major as of Thanksgiving. So that's two. Third is generally financial. So financial need is a non-trivial problem, but our financial need challenge is directly tied to those first two. You're wasting too much time on credits that don't count toward a degree, and your financial aid runs out. And so you find yourself out of money and you've got a bunch of credits, but still no degree. There are a bunch more. So I encourage you to take a look at the NIST, National Institute for Student Success Study, which goes through a very detailed analysis of the barriers to success at the University of Utah. Because the three top generic ones are academic problems, social, and financial. And we have those two. Over here. I can repeat it.
The graph that you showed with the university being at such a low graduation rate for undergrads, has that been a trend over time, or is that decreasing, or do you know what that data looks like?
We have increased over time. This is positive news for you. Under Ruth Watkins' leadership, we moved from about 50-ish% into the 60s, which is how why it is that we're in the AAU, in addition to our academic performance, research performance. But I would argue this is our greatest risk in the AAU, and not that the AAU is our reason for doing things. Our reason for doing things should be the moral imperative and responsibility that we have to our students. But that's improvement over the last 20 years. And I will also say, because the common question asked is, well, our students are different, which is a story I've heard at the 5 universities where I've worked. And the answer is no, they're not. And so this is not because a percentage of our students, which is in the teens, low teens, go on mission. When you go on mission, you take leave and you stop your clock. That is not the explanation. So don't share that with folks. Feel free to debunk that myth. That's not what it is.
Hello.
Hello.
Looking at the Pew, was it Pew Research that had the reputation or confidence in higher ed going down?
Yeah.
Does the university have any plan for combating that doesn't end up pulling us into things like bad faith arguments, or I guess hurting a lot of minority historically oppressed students?
I would separate those two things. So yes, are we working to increase the perceived value of higher education? Absolutely. So that's everything from PR campaign to storytelling to advocacy with our lobby groups. But this is general public, although I would say the general public perception is reflected in our elected officials. So some of this and part of the reason we've seen such the decline in higher education are a few different things. And this is attributed to, it's a long arc of how we got here that goes back to much of it, the 2008, 9, 10 financial crisis, which is interesting in that what led to the increase in tuition, the increase in the price or the cost of higher education was state disinvestment. And yet the public doesn't understand that, right? So your state legislatures reduced investment in higher ed, and so most states increased price. We did some, but we're the lowest. So also if I put a rank up here of price of tuition and fees of all of the AAUs, we would be second to the lowest, with the lowest being Florida, which invests significantly in higher education. We actually have extremely high state investment in higher ed compared to many other states. We approach, depending on how you count it, between 25 and 35% of our budget comes from the state. So they are our primary investor. So what happened when that happened nationally is that clearly the public perceived massive increase in cost in exchange for nothing different. And so debt went up, student debt went up at the same time, and all these other factors happened. We have an advantage in this state of being lower price. So there is that value argument here, but it is a difficult story to tell because you're working against your legislature, who still is your funder. And I would also say that there's this challenge in for some in understanding, especially when you think about the general population who responds to polls like this. The general population still has a low degree of incidence of having a degree and holding a degree. So that creates a challenge. Do I think that negatively affects underrepresented populations separately? I think the message that we need to tell should benefit that population. And our actions aren't going to change that. I can tell you in this state, the answer is not going to be, therefore we raise tuition. And again, it's not our decision anyway, where there's a constraint on that by way of USHE and the governor's office. So the response is to try to respond with stories, which in fact, some of the stories that land best are actually out of health sciences, because what the health sciences do for the average person, people understand. Explaining the value of a lot of our rest of our research is a little harder. So sciences, engineering, and technology, those stories resonate with people, and we know that, and that's what a lot of research has shown. So it is storytelling. It is the need for more public scholarship. Each of our faculty telling the story with however many people they have contact with of what we do, how it matters, and telling the stories from our students' perspective of how lives and generations have been changed. So it is storytelling, and it's challenging, and it's going to take a village and a lot of effort in order to move this needle, because it didn't drop overnight. We did have a significant negative effect after October 7th and the protest season that we've been through. But this isn't the first season of protest in higher ed. Higher ed's been through protests before and will continue to go through protests. So we're open to ideas, and there are lots of efforts underway, including by all the national organizations, in our case being led by AAU, working to change this narrative.
Hello, my name is Michael. I have a question on money. The in-state tuition at the University of Utah is about 10,000. The out-of-state tuition at the California University system, for example, UCLA, is about 45. 35,000 difference. Where does the money come for the students who study at the University of Utah?
Or so you mean, are you comparing our in-state tuition to the UC system out-of-state tuition?
The argument is it seems to cost about 45,000 to have a good education at a public university. We only charge 10,000. Where do 36,000 come from?
Okay, I got it. The state is the short answer. So the state is the short answer on, they are a major subsidizer of education in the state. And that's important for us to understand. For as frustrating and frustrated as we might feel toward one of our major investors, this state is still, in fact, highly generous to higher education. So we're subsidized by the state is the short answer.
Because you only said a third of the budget comes from the state.
The rest is tuition. So students pay tuition. And then we also have philanthropy. So interestingly enough, the University of Utah, if I did a ranking of AAU schools on philanthropy, holding other factors constant, we would be in the top of publics. We'd be in the top 1 or 2. So we punch above our weight in philanthropy, which is great because that means we have a lot of opportunity for scholarships for our students and investment in facility, research, and so on. Yes.
One more question and then people move on.
Said the voice of God. Wherever we went.
Clayton, so I come from the business side of things in like IT. And I'll phrase my question so we can localize it for everyone. But you spoke about the modernization of education, and that resonates to me in IT, thinking, how can we modernize our technology, our implementations to better serve student populations? What are actionable tasks you'd have for IT to better meet the student experience when students join, and what are actionable things the educators could take into their classroom to create a more modern experience?
Thank you. Good question. So modernization, as I was speaking there, is about our systems that enable all of our workflow. So you are probably familiar with the fact that we've implemented EAB, which is an underlying system for us to basically be able to think of it as, well, I was going to use another business term. So CRM, think of it as a customer relationship management tool for students. So we know where they are, exactly who talked to that student, told them what, so that anytime anybody touches that student, they can see all the things that has been engaged with that student. It's not that we haven't had one. We have had one. It was called Civitas, but it was use it if you feel like it. We've now moved into mandatory adoption and use of this tool, mandatory training for all of our advisors and others who engage with that student so that we can see the holistic picture of what's going on with that student, which now lets us move into predictive analytics around how to advise that student, how to put guardrails around that student. So that student who wants to change their major the 8th time, you actually want to block that and force them into an advising session and say, this is the financial impact of your decision. Are you sure? Maybe we should look at where all of your credits would apply. What do you really think you're interested in, and do a different approach? So that's one. Secondly, we don't have effective and integrated and seamless communications to our students. An average student at the start of term is spammed with, I think the average was something like 95 messages per week. And it peaks and goes up to 200 and some, like the week before class and first week of class. Think of it's athletics, it's student affairs. Athletics is about half of them, by the way. Student affairs. It's every one of your professors who's telling you, hey, I'm so happy to meet you. And this is good messaging. That's good messaging. Just when I want to send you another message, but they got 5 of you, times the messages from each of you. And their advisor, and on and on and on it goes. And so what do? Any of you have kids? They ignore you, is what they do. Yeah, they delete, they're not even using their university email account. That's what's even more amusing. And so we don't have control of that. Well, we don't have a chatbot function that is seamless across our entire website that lets a student ask a question and gets them to the right place. We don't have a call center, a normal call center technology that would enable better. Again, I don't want to refer to our students as customers, but you are all customers and consumers out there. And when you've had effective service, and when you're irritated when you call and have to type your answer into your phone, right? And then when you type it wrong, or you get to someone and they hang up on you. So that's how it feels to navigate a huge bureaucracy like a university. And they're not experts at what we do. So those are just a few examples. In class, clearly Canvas is an incredibly powerful tool. And many of our faculty are not really using the full suite of capability that would be possible with just Canvas as one example. And so that's just one example. And certainly thinking through what is the best mode of delivery for a particular class and or content, what pedagogy is suited for that. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we have to take advantage of things there, including, the topic of your talk later. How do we now integrate AI into that? So just to use a simple example of the power of AI in classes where we have very high DEWI rates, which are basically the failing rates and withdrawal classes. I think we don't use Fs here. Everywhere else it's called DFW, but whatever it's called here, the very low grade classes, as you might imagine, math is on the high on that list. Increasingly, and we should be adopting AI tools to support learning in those classes and to reduce those failure rates. And so we're in the very early days of starting to experiment with this, and other universities have adopted those things some time ago, particularly in math classes. So that's just a few examples. All right, I thank you very much. It's been great talking with you.